Hello.
Hi.
I've become aware of how what I'm transmitting is affecting other people, and your description is very helpful. What I'm much less clear about is how other people's transmissions are affecting me and the environments I choose. Work environment,
Yeah.
family environment,
Yeah.
the social situations that I gravitate to. And I sometimes feel that it doesn't matter. Sometimes I tell myself, when I'm in a negative situation, I say, hey, just outshine them. Just be bright and be strong and clear. But then other times, that seems grandiose and not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering if you could comment on whether it's necessary or important to be selective about our human environments, or whether consciousness is enough.
Well, both. The more clear we become, right? The more clear we become, the more we reside in our true state. One does experience that you are less and less and less and less affected by other people's state of consciousness. You register it more acutely, but you're affected by it less. Because basically, even though the divided ego state is very noisy and very harsh and seems very powerful and strong, it's actually an extraordinarily weak force. And when we're residing in our natural state is an extraordinarily strong force. And I don't mean strong like muscle strong. I don't mean strong like some necessarily big, booming, shining light. I mean strong in the sense of you can shoot an arrow through an empty room and you'll never hit the emptiness in the room. Right? You'll hit the other wall, but you won't really, it'll go through the emptiness, but it won't stick. And so the more we're in our natural state, things don't stick. We are a transparency. So it's not a protective thing, it's actually a transparency. Things come kind of right through, like they do an open window. And yet, if I left it at that, then a misperception would happen in people's minds. It's a common misperception, which is, all I got to do is become free enough to where I can be in any situation, any godforsaken, stupid, destructive situation, and just be happy. And that's a misunderstanding, right? Because with this comes not only a certain invulnerability and a great love and compassion, but also a wisdom. And for the most part, someone whom through this awakened consciousness is happening, they do not tend to be the people who hang out in destructive environments. Not necessarily because they're trying to protect themselves, but simply because there's nothing there for them. There's no reason. It just doesn't make sense. It's like, why? What's the point? You see, so it's not necessarily a protective thing, it's just a sort of a wisdom thing. There's just nothing, there's no point to it. Right? Mm-hmm. So this doesn't mean that you're going to find a perfect environment anywhere, are you?
No.
You're never going to find the perfect job and the perfect situation and the perfect person, and that's never going to happen.
Right.
It's never, ever, ever going to happen. But there is there's a balance point, right? Of not seeking some ideal to hide in, but at the same time having a wisdom that a wisdom of how to respond.
Part of what I'm getting from this is that if I come home at the end of the day from work, say, sitting at what I call long rectangular tables talking with state bureaucrats or whatever it may be,
Yeah.
and if I feel battered or pulled down at the end of that 8 hours, that may be telling me something about my sticking places that stuff can
It
stick
might be.
to me. You know,
Yeah.
what's not empty in that room for me.
Yeah.
And,
Because the feeling of batteredness means on some level we were engaged in a battle.
yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yes.
I mean, obviously there are some people that are going to wear anybody out. You know? There are some people that Jesus at the end of the day is going to go, holy smokes, you know. Can I just go to the desert for 40 days, get away from my disciples, and have a little peace and quiet for a while? You know, so
Sure.
there's always that element. But see, it's balance. It's a balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? It's a balance. Yeah, you know, nobody gets to the point, you know, where you're just completely unaffected by anything. And at the other hand, there's also always the opportunity to look. You know, am I wearing myself out? And how am I contributing to doing that? Mm-hmm. You know.
On the other side of the coin, occasionally in these meetings, the long rectangular table meetings, I'll feel spontaneously moved to transmit silence to the room. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is a real go nowhere, long discussion going on. And when you talked about integrity has no agenda, mm-hmm. I questioned whether that could constitute an agenda or an imposition for me to start, you know, blocking silence into a room full of people trying to get some work done. I'm just wondering, I started to wonder if there's an egoic agenda.
You already know the answer. The question is the answer. You see?
Okay.
It lies in it. Not that there's the silence isn't a problem, but the consciously, willfully imposing the silence onto the situation. It's just not necessary. Mm-hmm. Right? That's where you can feel just a little bit of me in there.
Yeah.
Where you can just be what you are, be that silence, without any notion of agenda at all. Just be it. Without any notion of how it's going to affect, or if it's going to affect, or what your mind would want to happen. Just be it for its own sake. Isn't that what consciousness is doing anyway?
Sure.
It doesn't seem to be insisting upon things for us, does it?
No.
This truth doesn't insist. It's a gift. It's just there. And somehow, when it's just a gift, it is it's received in a different way. You know.
It has no outcome in mind.
Pardon me?
It has no outcome in mind.
That's right. Because remember that even if our agenda is, quote, good in our minds, we're transmitting that agenda. When we're transmitting that agenda, it's saying, this is the way I think things should be, which is also transmitting they shouldn't be this way. And even though you might be putting silence out, you're also transmitting that little bit of division in there, right?
Yes.
And that division, remember, whatever we transmit tends to manifest.
Right.
And that will at some point manifest.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Sure does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. I realized this very early on when I was teaching, by the way, because I had a little bit of what you're speaking about, and when I very first started teaching, I noticed, and it was quite spontaneous. I hadn't heard about it. I didn't really know. I didn't really know exactly what I was doing, but I noticed when I would be with somebody, and I could be talking with them, or we could be meeting in private or whatever, and they could be having some difficulty or asking some question, and I could just turn up the presence, and I could turn it up so strongly that I could just totally overwhelm them, and I could turn it up so much that they would come into a realization of it, and all of a sudden they'd be, oh my God, that's what I am. And in that very early time, in a certain naivete, I thought, that's fantastic. What could be better than people waking up to what they really are, right? You just ramp up the presence. You just turn it up like a light dimmer, and if you turn it up enough, it just overwhelms someone's delusory mind, and it literally silences it, and they have this moment of seeing. But very fortunately, I saw very, very quickly that when you do it for somebody, number one, they tend to lose it as fast as they got it. And number two, what you also transmit is that agenda. And even a good agenda is not a manifestation of truth. Even a good one. It's not a manifestation of truth. You see, love is the agenda of truth. Not an outcome. Not this or that. And I won't go into the details of what I saw, that little teeny agenda, that effect that I had, but I saw very early on that it did have an effect, and so I dropped it. I stopped doing that. Because I saw very quickly, just because you can sort of, in a certain sense, it's not that I could give this to somebody, but it's just that I could induce its recognition in them. And I realized it's not, the price that they pay for it isn't worthwhile. So even that agenda that seemed totally, absolutely good, has to be let go of. Has to be let go of. Even the best agendas. And then we see that this, whatever we want to call it, the divine truth, God, whatever you want to call it, that it has its own way of working. It has its own timing. And if it wants to spontaneously turn itself up really brightly, it will do so. But now it does so on its own terms, in its own time, not on my terms and my time. And I saw it has a much different impact when it happens of its own accord. And I think, ties in with what you're saying, that it was eye-opening to see that even the very best agendas, they're not as good as what the divine has in store. Right? And we are but, even though we are that simultaneously as human beings, we are but vessels for it. Right? It's a balance again, knowing that you are the divine, and also simultaneously you are but a vessel or a servant through which it happens. You're not the one to dictate its outcome. And it's very important. I was glad I learned that really, really early, because I could see later, boy, I could have done, things can get very sticky if you don't learn that. Yeah. It makes a good show, though. Right? Everybody's very impressed, Oh, look at this person. Boy, everybody that talks to Adya gets a moment of awakening. It looks very good. But then later, how do you know? That person might not have been ready for it, right? All of a sudden, they're thrown into the infinite, and their mind isn't quite ready for it. And their mind is coming back to me and going, God, what do I do? The whole bottom dropped out of my life, you know? So you never know. This truth of divinity knows infinitely more than our minds will ever know. It has its own way and its own timing and its own grace. So no matter how clear we become, it's so important that we also have a corresponding humility that comes with it. Yeah. Otherwise we become dangerous. And I think most of us have seen examples of that.